Morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thanks for not forgetting that our group actually meets. Sorry for missing 2 consecutive days. We'll begin with chapter 13, verse 47. We actually began this Kliyakar back on Tuesday, and the Kliyakar was interested, why would it be that a person had tzaras on one's garments? In other words, there are 3 types of tzaras. There's tzaras on the body. So we get it. I mean, this is a point the Kliyakar's been making in various ways, that it's because a person's conducting themselves in an inappropriate manner. There's tzaras on the home. The Kliyakar already posited that it has to do with how one is treating one's possessions, and that if a person is not sharing of one's home and one's assets with others, then maybe there's tzaras. But what would be the relevance of tzaras on the garment? So if you look at the Kliyakar on Pasuk Mem Zayin, in mine, we're up to the second paragraph, which is Va'karov Elai. But if you don't have the layout that way, it's probably about 5 or 6 lines into the Kliyakar. Va'karov Elai Lomar. What makes sense to me is to say, Gihein boim al gasus haruach, that tzaras on the garment comes from a sense of haughtiness. Kiderech ha'olam liskabi b'yoser b'abushe kavod. It's the way of the world to take honor in dignified clothing. You have even in the Gemara says that Rabbi Yochanan called his garments his vehicles of honor. In other words, that's how a person is how a person is seen. Ukmosha Amr Razal, the rabbis teach, Likdosh Hashem bechubad kabdeu b'ksus nakiya. The pasuk talks about the Holy One of God who's honored, and the Gemara says on that one can honor God by wearing clean clothing. The Alkain din habeged hanagua b'sreifa. Kol miskoya nidon ba'esh k'mvur l'mala parshat stab b'pasuk hi hola al mokda ki kach tevo eish lalos l'mala k'mozeh ha'ola b'mala v'din sreifas hachametz yochiach. It says a very interesting thing. Practically speaking, if the garment has tzaras on it, it's going to be burnt. So we said that idea of burning connects with haughtiness. Of course, fire rises, smoke rises. He says that also it wasn't so long ago that we were talking about chametz. So, chametz, one of the ideas of chametz has to do with haughtiness. So what do we do with chametz? We burn chametz. He says it's all connected. Interesting idea. V'taharaso b'kibus mayim hamore ageder ho'anava sheyorden mimakom gavoa al makom namuch. If the garment can be salvaged, it's purified through exposure to water. Water represents humility because water naturally goes from a high point to a low point, flows in that way. Okay, I think let's skip about another 8 lines or so. You should realize the 3 types of tzaras come for 3 different things that act as a cover for a person. Michsa rishonhu oro libsaro. The most basic cover that a person has is the person's skin. Lamala meoro, above the person's skin, the next layer is begadav, garments. Shem kisui laoro, they cover the skin. Lamala mehem, above the garments. Beso kumachaselo latzilo mimator mizerem. Then above the garments is the home, because that covers one, provides shade, provides shelter. Umisha chusame olav kol michsa nikre parua umagula. If all of a person's covers have been removed, if all of a person's protections have been removed, they're called like parua. It means like they're exposed. L'kach ne'amar vayar Moshe sa'am ki paruahu. After Moshe came back from Har Sinai and he saw that the Jewish people had committed the sin of the golden calf, it says that Moshe saw that the people were parua, which we would normally translate as they were disgraced. They had, their lack of spirituality had been revealed. Darshu Razal Shinoku Butsaras Shinamar Bovarosho Farua. There's a drush actually on that pasuk that they got saras. It's a medrash. Okay, his ketchilas nige oro. So he says this is what saras is, that slowly a person loses all of their covers. all of their basic manner of presentation or protecting themselves from being exposed and embarrassed. So these are the three types of tzaras. Okay. Amnam, Ladas Razal Haseder Hafu, Ki Amru, Ein Balarachmin Ogeb and Fashos Tchila. So the way the Kli Yakar was explaining it up until now, it like starts on the skin and gradually works out. Skin, clothing, house. There's a medrash that he cites that says it's the other way around. At first, God brings a mark on the house. Lo chazer bo, if a person doesn't retract, doesn't do tshuva, maybe gam al begadav, then God will also bring it on the person's clothing. Lo chazer bo, if a person doesn't repent, maybe gam al gufo, then God will bring it even on one's body. Okay, so this is just an interesting, we sort of have two different angles going right now. One is that different types of shortcomings bring about different types of tzaras. It's one perspective the Kli Yakar was saying, and the other perspective was that it's a gradual progression, sort of like to bring the point home. Interesting to think about. Okay. They say there's a second parsha this week, so we're going to go to that briefly. Chapter 14, verse 2. Chapter 14, verse 2. So it's interesting. So Tazria-Metzora is one of the most striking, logical double parshas because Tazria is all about the gradual process of the question if he has tzaras or not, and what to do about the tzaras. Metzora is now the person's finished with their tzaras, at least the significant part of Parshas Metzora. The person's finished with their tzaras, and now there are certain offerings brought in the Beis HaMikdash coming off of their tzaras. So, chapter 14, verse 1, Vaydaber Hashem Moshe Limor, Hashem said to Moshe, verse 2, Zos tieh Toras HaMetzora b'yom taharaso. This will be the law of the Metzora on the day of his purification from tzaras, v'huval haKohen, and he is brought to the Kohen. Verse 3, the Kohen comes out outside the camp. The Kohen sees, and behold, the person's tzaras is indeed cured. Let's see the Kli Yakar on Pasuk Beis. Zos tieh Toras HaMetzora. Hakasuv Kara'u Metzora, mashma shu adayin Metzora. Ve'eich Amar b'yom taharaso. It's a little bit of a funny irony in the word choice here. This is the law of the person with tzaras on the day that they don't have tzaras. So why are you calling them the person with tzaras? I mean, obviously, it's not the worst question in the world. I mean, it's not the strongest question in the world. It could be the person who has had tzaras, but there's something that sort of scratches about it. That's question number one. Question number two, v'od, eich karo yom taraso korim she'omar b'nei nirpa. It's really strange. This is the law of the person with tzaras on the day that he's purified. Okay, I guess the context of the pasuk is that he doesn't have tzaras anymore. He goes out to the Kohen, and the Kohen looks, and behold, there's no more tzaras. So again, it's not the worst thing in the world. Verse 2 is sort of like a topic sentence, and now the subsequent sukkim explain what happens, but it also feels a little funny. The language at the end of verse 2, he's brought to the Kohen, is also striking. It implies that he's forced to come to the Kohen. Is that what we mean? Verse 3 starts off that the Kohen comes out outside the camp. So which one is it? Is the person being brought to the Kohen, or is the Kohen being brought to the person? The old Mausham Vinenia Pronegat Rasmanat Sarua, Pasach Bestein, Visim Baachas, Vailolomar, Min Hanagua Bitsaras. The pasuk about him being healed seems slightly asymmetrical. Okay, we're going to skip the next paragraph of the Kli Yakar because he really is sort of reviewing his general perspective about tzaras, which we've seen a lot of. Skip about 10 to 15 lines and go on to V'zeu Shenemar. And this is what is said, Zos tieh Toras HaMetzora b'yom taharaso. This will be the law of the Metzora on the day of his purification. Ki b'yom shechadesh leiv tar b'kirbo. On the day that a new heart renews within him. V'kabel alav lashuv b'tshuva, and the person accepts upon himself that he has to be a different person. On the day that the person really recognizes, I've got to change, bo bayom yuva bal korcho el hakohen lilmod mimenu derech Hashem. I mean, this is far from the literal meaning of the verse, but it's a very interesting thing to think about. So if you look at verse 2 for a second, this is what happens to the person who still has tsaras on the day of his purification, not on the day where he doesn't have tsaras anymore, on the day that he decides he's going to turn over a new leaf, where it really, really hits him. My gosh, I've got to be a different person. I've got to understand the message. He's brought to the Kohen. It's not that anybody's schlepping him to the Kohen. It's that circumstances are bringing him to the Kohen. He says to himself, I need to become a different person, and interfacing with this Kohen, this person who's looked at as a man of God, is going to help me on that path. The idea of being brought doesn't mean he's being literally, physically moved from place to place. It's talking about the heart, the movement of his heart. From the bad path that he was on, to the good path. This means that he accepts upon himself to be brought close to the Kohen, and to ask and to seek out Torah understanding from him. This is what we mean when we talk about the perspective of the Metzora. Once he accepts upon himself to be a person of pure thought and a pure perspective, that he's not always looking for the bad in people, that's what it means. Now, once the person's internalized all of this, now the Kohen comes out and he sees there's not Saras there anymore. But what it also means is he sees the person has changed. The person is different. So it's just certainly an interesting thing to think about. And that's really the goal of all of this. I mean, this is really, this is clearly the classic perspective on Saras, that it's a message from God that a person should really internalize and think about. I see it's already 9:45, so maybe this is a good place to stop. So we discussed the Kli Yakar's perspective on the different types of tzaras, and we discussed, I think, a very novel approach that Kli Yakar has at the beginning of Parshas Metzora, and